Shalom and welcome back to the Messiah Yeshua. I'm glad you're here to learn the Word of God with us. Today we're diving into this week's portion, which is called Tazria and Metzora together. So we are combining both of them, as they're usually read combined except on the leap years. But for the purposes of our teaching, we will do separate teachings on Tazria, which is today, and we will do separately Metzora tomorrow. So we'll see its wisdom, its beauty, and we'll see how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Leviticus 12:1 through 13:59, which will connect us to Isaiah 66:1 through 24, as well as Mark 9:40 through 50. And let's take a look at the torahportion summary. So once again, except on leap years, parsha Tazria is read in conjunction with Metzora together on the same Sabbath. Metzora continues the distinction between clean and unclean that began with the list of unclean animals in Leviticus 11. This time, however, the Torah discusses human sources of ritual impurity, beginning with childbirth. A woman who gives birth to a child is rendered ritually unclean for 7 days if she gives birth to a boy and 14 days if she gives birth to a girl. After this initial state of ritual purity, she continues in a secondary state of Levitical separation and cannot eat of the sacrifices or enter the holy temple for an additional 33 days for a boy or 66 days for a girl. So as you guys can see, it's almost doubled for a girl. Have you ever wondered why? At the conclusion of this time, she brings a sacrifice to the Lord to mark her purification. And Leviticus 13 goes on to discuss the symptoms and laws of biblical leprosy, a condition that describes various skin afflictions and spreading mold and mildew in houses and garments. If a person suspects he might have contracted the dreaded disease, or he suspects that his garments might have it, he summons a priest who makes the diagnosis. To assist the priest in making a proper diagnosis, the Torah provides a long list of detailed descriptions of the symptoms. If the priest suspects that the malady may indeed be leprosy, he quarantines the subject for 7 days and then checks him over again carefully to see if the marks have spread or changed. If the condition has spread, he declares the malady leprous and declares the person or garments unclean. Garments can be burned, but a person with leprosy must leave his home and community, cover his face, and warn people away from him, saying, "Unclean, unclean." So the name of the 27th reading now from the Torah is Tazria, which means she conceived. The name is derived from the words of Leviticus 12:2, where the Lord says to Moses, "When a woman conceives and bears a male child," Leviticus 12 discusses the laws of purification after childbirth, and Leviticus 13 introduces the laws for diagnosing and quarantining lepers. Except in biblical calendar leap years, Tazria, once again, is read together with subsequent Torah portion Metzora on the same Sabbath. Miracle of life. Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, when a woman gives birth, Leviticus 12:2. The birth of a child is a holy and wonderful thing. Every time a baby is born, the birthing brings to light a small incarnation. Every baby is an immortal soul, housed in garments of flesh. A baby comes into the world in the image of God. Life springs forth from life. In some cases, the miracle is more obvious than in others. So this is a story from a friend of ours, which we included that an acquaintance of his wife was having a baby. When complications occurred, the baby was in the wrong position in the birth canal, and the doctors grew concerned. They listened carefully to the heart monitor as the birth progressed, but sadly the fluttering heartbeat tapered off and stopped. An hour later, the baby girl was stillborn. The doctor set the lifeless body aside, and the mother and father were crushed. In the midst of her tears, the mother saw the baby's leg move. She pointed out to the staff, but the doctors explained that these were simply reflexive muscle movements. A few moments later, the baby gasped, coughed, and gasped again. Suddenly, the hospital staff went to an emergency frenzy as they began resuscitation of the little girl. The child is fine today. So not every story has a happy ending like that. There are a few things more sober and heart-rending than a pregnancy that ends prematurely or a baby born into this world only to pass on to the next world. We can't explain why things like that happen, but it is possible that some souls are so pure and burn so hot that they quickly return to the flame that first gave them life. The laws of the Torah ensured that in the days of the tabernacle, the amazing miracle of birth would not be treated as something mundane. God cordoned off childbirth with holy laws that gave the new mother a special status. Leviticus 12 contains the laws of purification after childbirth. She shall be unclean. When a woman gives birth and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean. Leviticus 12:2. Why is a woman who gives birth to a baby regarded as unclean? Before we can answer that perplexing question, we need to consider the context of the law. The next several chapters of the Torah are primarily concerned with the laws of ritual purity. They were given to Israelites to teach when they are unclean and when they are clean, Leviticus 14:57. The creation of the tabernacle and the institution of the sacrificial services made this information relevant to the Israelites. Therein lies much of the difficulty that we have in understanding this part of the Bible. We have been without a temple for almost 2,000 years. The laws of ritual purity have not had any real meaningful application since the days of the apostles. In the previous Torah portion, we have begun to learn about the biblical concept of ritual purity. A brief recapitulation will be helpful. So a person might be either ritually clean, which is tahor, or ritually unclean, which is tamei. The problem with the English words clean and unclean is that they seem to imply that there is something dirty, repulsive, or morally deficient about a person who is labeled unclean, and that is not the case at all. So we have been translating the Hebrew terms tahor and tamei as ritually fit and ritually unfit, respectively. To be ritually fit means that a person is in a state whereby he is fit to enter the tabernacle, participate in its services, and eat of the sacrifices. A ritually unfit person is barred from admission and is required to abstain from eating the sacrifices. It is not a sin to be ritually unfit, but it is a sin to eat of the sacrifices while ritually unfit. Keeping these basic ideas in mind will help us as we work through the next several chapters of Leviticus. Sin and death. She shall be unclean for 7 days, as in the days of her menstruation she shall be unclean, Leviticus 12:2. A person could be very righteous and in good relationship with God, and yet be ritually unfit. The states of fit and unfit refer only to the physical flesh level of our existence. They do not bespeak the moral state of our hearts. To be ritually unfit prevented a person from participating in the sacrificial system. We have already learned that the sacrificial system was means of drawing near to God. It was a means whereby the worshiper could bring God a gift, so to speak. It was a way to celebrate fellowship with God, to eat from his table, and to symbolize relationship with him. When a person was unfit, he was unable to enjoy those privileges. Why is that? Though being ritually unfit should not be viewed as spiritual state, it does symbolize spiritual realities. Ritual unfitness is often related to mortality and death. For example, the Torah teaches that contact with a dead body leaves a person ritually unfit. Similarly, contact with a deadly disease of leprosy renders a person ritually unfit as well. Through these laws, the Torah is teaching that God is about life. The dwelling place of God was to be considered a place of life. In the same way that sin must not be mixed with righteousness, and the holy must not be mixed with the unholy. The dwelling place of God was not to be polluted with death. Human death, decay, and mortal corruption were to be kept far from the doors of the tabernacle. Although being ritually unfit is not a sin, it is related to sin, the original sin. Before Adam and Eve sinned, there was no ritual unfitness. Because humans had never experienced death, and therefore ritual unfitness symbolizes sin. Its laws teach us about how sin prevents us from enjoying relationship with God. And I'll talk about the reasons. Then she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification are completed. Leviticus 12:4. So giving birth to a baby made a woman ritually unfit. This means she could not enter the tabernacle or touch the sacrifices until being ritually purified. She had to wait 40 days for ritual purification if she had given birth to a boy, and 80 days if she had given birth to a girl. These laws inspire curiosity. Why does the childbirth leave a woman unfit, and why is the term longer for giving birth to a girl? An important part of the explanation is that there is no explanation. These are statutes of the Almighty, and they do not necessarily need rationale. Asking why childbirth makes a woman unfit or why giving birth to a girl makes her unfit longer is like asking why God designated the horse as an unfit animal and the goat as a fit animal. There is certain amount of sacred arbitrariness to the system. If you think about it, it makes sense that God's laws don't always make sense. If God's laws always made good sense to human wisdom, obedience would be predicted on our capacity to reason. We would obey God primarily because His laws made good sense to us. This might work when you are taking advice from a counselor or therapist. Your therapist suggests some reasonable measures to help you improve your situation and live a better life, so that you take his advice to heart and try to implement his suggestions. God is not your therapist. He is a holy king with the right to make inexplicable mandates. He is God. He utterly transcends human reason. Just the fact that he declares something to be is a reason enough for it to be so. The whole creation depends on that principle. It does not really make sense that the universe exists at all. It exists only because God spoke it into being. When we quit trying to figure everything out and simply agree to let God dictate the terms, we can serve Him in true obedience. If we wait until we discover some reasonable explanation behind His laws before implementing them, we are not really obeying Him. We are obeying human reason. Nevertheless, we still would like to know why God designates a woman who gives birth to a baby as ritual unfit. It seems like giving birth to a baby is all about life, whereas ritual unfitness is all about death. So why are the values reversed at childbirth? There are at least few possible answers. When a woman gives birth to a child, she fulfills the imprecations spoken against our first mother. After the sin in the garden, God told Eve, "I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children." Genesis 3:16. So the curse on Eve was passed on to all of her daughters. It came as a direct result of sin. Though the mother giving birth did not eat the fruit in a garden, the pain of the childbirth harkens back to that first sin and its ultimate consequence of death. Ritual unfitness is often associated with death. The birth of a baby is a celebration of life. A woman who gives birth to a baby begets life, but by the same token, she begets death. From the moment child is conceived, he begins his journey toward death. Perhaps the ritual unfitness that accompanies childbirth is meant to remind us that all human life eventually ends in death. There is another less symbolic explanation that childbirth is messy and involves a discharge of blood and other bodily fluids. Intermittent discharges follow for several days, creating a state similar to menstruation. So according to the purity laws, the menstruation and similar discharges made a person ritually unfit, right? So the text makes this relationship explicit when it says, "As in the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean." Leviticus 12:2. And it also explains the 40-day period for waiting before returning to a ritually fit state. Viva la differencia! If she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her menstruation, and she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 66 days. Leviticus 12:5. The Torah states that there is difference between the amount of time a mother is unfit depending on whether she gave birth to a boy or a girl. The birth of a girl makes her unfit for twice the length of time. Again, the safest explanation for this is that there is no explanation. It is simply the statue of the Holy One, blessed be He. On the other hand, one might say, while the birth of a son is special, the birth of a daughter is more so because a girl represents continuity in the chain of life. She has the potential to bring more children into the world. Therefore, the birth of a baby girl is observed with twice the amount of sanctity. This can be compared to a potter with 2 apprentices. One showed no talent for the work, while the other demonstrated great promise of being a successful artisan. The potter dutifully trained the untalented one, even though he knew the man would never be a potter. But he put twice the amount of effort into training the talented apprentice because he knew his efforts would result in a great potter. The sin of childbirth. When the days of her purification are completed, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at a doorway of tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. Leviticus 12:6. After the mother's days of purification were completed, she was readmitted to the tabernacle and sacrificial service. At that time, she was required to bring a burnt offering and a sin offering to the Lord. The sin offering seems troubling. Did the woman sin by having a baby? On the contrary, she was fulfilling the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. Why did she need to bring a sin offering? The sages of the Talmudic era wondered about this too, and they came up with some interesting explanations. The Talmud explains that when a woman is in the pain of childbirth, she might inadvertently curse her husband or take a vow never to let him touch her again. And because of that, she must bring a sin offering to exonerate herself from her rash vow or her resentful thoughts. Women who have gone through the pain of childbirth may find this explanation amusing and even concur with some of the sentiments. But this is hardly a credible interpretation. A simpler explanation is that the sin offering were often brought for purification purposes. When that happened, the sin offering was not a punishment for sin or a consequence of iniquity. It was simply part of their purification ritual. Along the similar lines, a person who suffered an unnaturally bodily discharge and a person being purified of leprosy also brought sin offerings. On a mystical level, the mother's 40 or 80-day journey through ritual unfitness is like a microcosm for her baby's own odyssey through life. Prior to having the baby, the woman was in state of ritual fitness. She enjoyed the presence of God in His holy dwelling place and was fit to eat from His table. After childbirth, there was a period of time during which she was unable to enter the dwelling place of God. At the conclusion of that time, the woman was readmitted to the tabernacle through the atonement of the sin offering. This progression of events symbolizes the baby's own passage through life. Her soul begins in the eternal dwelling place of God, but her birth in human flesh requires a departure from that place and a sojourn outside of God's heavenly tabernacle. After an allotted period of time, the soul leaves the body to return to God. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. And we can see that in Ecclesiastes 12:7. So through the atonement of the Messiah's timeless sin offering, the soul of the believer returns to fellowship with her source. The mother's readmission to the tabernacle might be said to symbolize the eventual return of new life to God. The sacrifices after childbirth reminds us that the act of giving birth is itself a miraculous encounter with the divine. It is not to be regarded as just ordinary life. Instead, the Torah grants the event's sanctity and significance by requiring sacrifices. The new baby is a gift from God, and the mother naturally wants to reciprocate with a gift. She brings a burnt offering and a sin offering as her gifts to God, who blessed her with a child. Giving birth to sinners, the one from a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Leviticus 12:8. This is another story about our friend. He had a wife of a person that he once knew that had just given birth to her first child. Her husband was admiring the precious new bundle of joy in his arms when he turned to his wife and said, "Honey, you've given birth to a sinner." Though the new baby had certainly never sinned, he was nonetheless destined for it. Each baby is the son or daughter of a Mr. Sinner and Miss Sinner. And the apple does not fall far from the tree. King David may have been alluding to this unhappy human reality when he said, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me." Psalm 51:5. Though the new baby had certainly never sinned, he was nonetheless destined for it. Each baby is the son or daughter of Mr. Sinner and Miss Sinner. And the apple does not fall far from the tree. The Apostle Paul said, "Just as through Adam sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned." And that's in Romans 5:12. So perhaps the sin offering is supposed to serve as a subtle reminder that a new child brought into the world represents the potential introduction of more sin. Perhaps it is a reminder that ever since Adam, the human race have been tainted with sin. That's not to suggest that Judaism would endorse the doctrine of absolute depravity taught by Reform theology. For that matter, neither would Judaism endorse the doctrine of original sin formulated by the 4th century church writer Augustine. Augustine taught that the cycle of sinner begetting sinner explains why it was necessary for the Messiah to be born of a virgin. To me, Augustine's speculation sounds far-fetched. I don't think that's the significance of the virgin birth. And besides, the sin offering after childbirth functions as a purification from ritual unfitness. It's not about compensating for sin. In any case, Miriam, the mother of the Messiah, kept the Torah's requirement and brought the required sin offering to the temple for her purification. Now we'll talk about leprosy. When a man has on his skin of his body a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of his body. That's Leviticus 13:2. Whenever we study the Bible, we anticipate discovering inspiration from the Word of God. It might be an encouraging promise or a word of admonition, but we expect to find some practical application, a message from God in His holy book. That's a little difficult in Leviticus 13. It takes some extra effort. In mid-Leviticus, the Torah delves into a long and detailed discussion of various types of scabs, rashes, infections, and skin eruptions. The laws of leprosy. It makes for difficult reading. Our first task is to get a handle on the literal intention of the subject matter, and that is, why is Leviticus so concerned about rashes and eczema? The topic under discussion is the diagnosis of a condition known as zarat. The word zarat is a bit of a mouthful, so we translate it with an English word, leprosy. The translation is misleading, as usual. The modern disease called leprosy is not identical with the biblical zarat. Biblical leprosy can be diagnosed from a variety of skin conditions that are not necessarily related to one another. Furthermore, biblical leprosy can appear as mildew in fabrics and leather, or might appear as mold and mildew on interior walls. There is a common misunderstanding about the laws of biblical leprosy. Because lepers were quarantined and put out of the camp or out of the city, modern readers assume that the Torah intended to stop the spread of a communicable disease, and that's not the case at all. There is no indication that biblical leprosy was communicable. The commentators are not even sure it was a naturally occurring affliction. Some believe it was supernatural disease as a lesson or punishment from God. The Torah quarantines lepers because they are ritually unfit, and their unfitness is communicable. Biblical leprosy is a ritual purity issue. That explains why it is discussed in the middle of the book of Leviticus. Biblical leprosy makes a person with the disease ritually unfit, and the biblical leper is also contaminating to the other people and things. Contact with someone afflicted by biblical leprosy transmits the unfitness. And a person afflicted with biblical leprosy took on the ritual status of a corpse. Diagnosis by the priest. Then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons, the priests, Leviticus 13:2. When a person suspected that his symptoms might be leprous, he went to the priest for diagnosis. The priesthood had to be trained in reading the signs of leprosy. They were reluctant to declare a person leprous because to do so had dire social and ritual consequences for the sick person, right? So the priest examined the person's symptoms. If it was clearly biblical leprosy, the priest had to declare the person leprous and unclean. If the priest had any doubt, he had to quarantine the person for 7 days to see if the leprosy advanced. If after the 7 days the leprosy had not advanced, another 7-day quarantine was in order. But if it had advanced, the priest had to declare the man leprous and unclean. If after the second period of 7 days the symptoms had not advanced, the priest declared the man clean. The man could immerse himself and have no further concern about leprosy unless the condition began to advance. A similar procedure was used to determine if the mildew-like spots in fabric or leather were leprous. So we're going to do the following summarizes of the complex procedure of diagnosis described in Leviticus 13, as it might be, and it is sometimes very confusing to people. So how do we diagnose leprosy? A person with leprous symptoms goes to the priest. The priest examines the symptoms. 1. White hair and depth of infection is leprosy. A priest declares the leper unclean. Number 2, symptoms indeterminate. Priest quarantines leper for 7 days. Priest re-examines after 7 days. If condition is unchanged, a person is quarantined additional 7 days and re-examined. If condition unchanged or fading, priest declares clean, person immerses. If condition has advanced, then the priest declares the leper unclean. And symptoms definite, priest declares the leper unclean, leper is put out of the camp. Fate of the leper, must leave the camp, city, rends his garments, uncovers head or lets hair be unkempt, covers lower half of face, warns others away because of the ritual contamination. And leper's garments, linen and wool and leather. Suspected item is brought to the priest. Priest examines the markings. Priest quarantines item 7 days and re-examines. If markings have spread, item is declared leprous. Item is burned. If markings have not spread, item is washed. Item quarantined 7 more days. Priest re-examines after 7 days. If markings remain unfaded, item declares leprous. Item is burned. If markings have faded, infected areas torn out. Remaining fabric watched for reoccurrence. If markings recur, item is declared leprous and the item is burned. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for you to understand and follow. Now we'll talk about a divine punishment. The priest shall look at the mark of the skin of the body, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him unclean. Leviticus 13:3. So traditional opinion does not regard biblical leprosy as a normal disease. Instead, the rabbis saw it as a divine punishment, and that's exactly what we talked about. Or we have given you a little bit of a hint. But the idea does have some biblical support. In Numbers 12:10, Miriam, the sister of Moses, was punished with leprosy for speaking derisively against Moses. 2 Chronicles 26:20 tells how King Uzziah was punished with leprosy for defying the Torah by offering incense in the temple. 2 Kings 5:27 tells how Elisha's servant Gehazi was smitten with leprosy for taking money from Naaman. Based on these passages, the rabbis believed that the biblical leprosy was an affliction for specific sins. This may not have always been the case, but the Torah does not indicate that leprosy was a divine punishment for specific sins. And the most important one is the sin of evil speech, which we'll talk about right now, which is called Lashon Hara. It is a chronic leprosy on the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. Leviticus 13:11. So the rabbis considered biblical leprosy to be primarily a punishment for the sin of evil speech. The Hebrew term for evil speech is Lashon Hara. It literally means evil tongue. The association between evil speech and leprosy is derived from the story of Miriam's leprosy. Miriam was punished with leprosy for grumbling against her brother Moses. Based on this story, the rabbis often use the passages as preaching material to speak about the sin of Lashon Hara. Yeshua and Paul both made a similar connection between evil speech and biblical leprosy. Biblical leprosy creates ritual unfitness. Yeshua declared evil speech to be a source of spiritual unfitness. He said, "But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man." Matthew 15:18. Paul made a direct connection between evil speech and skin afflictions, and he said this: "Worldly and empty chatter will lead to further ungodliness, and their talk will spread like a gangrene." 2 Timothy 2:16-17. So set on fire by hell. If leprosy breaks out farther on the skin, Leviticus 13:12. Biblical leprosy usually began with a small spot or blemish on the skin, but it quickly spread across the whole body. Evil speech is very similar. It can start with a simple, almost innocent remark, but it quickly grows into a demeaning and destructive torrent of derision. The ritual unfitness created by biblical leprosy was so strong that it could pass from person to person. Simply being in a room with a leper was enough to contaminate you. Gossip is the same way. Just being around the gossip is very dangerous. Once evil speech is launched, it passes from person to person faster than the flames of a forest fire burning through a dry forest. James, the brother of the Master, compares it to a forest fire lit by the flames of hell. And he says this: "See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire, and the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body, and sets on fire the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison." James 3:5-8. A worthless religion. Whenever raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. Leviticus 13:14. So again, James, the brother of the master, says that if anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. James 1:26. Imagine a person who spent the whole day carrying buckets of water to fill a cistern, only to find that the cistern had a leak and the water had all drained out. All his toil and labor was wasted. And that's the way it is for us if we are busy studying, learning, praying, and living a life of faith and godliness, but not controlling our tongues. Remember, our tongue has the power of life and death, and everything that comes out of our mouth should always be good. Why are the way we talk and the things we say such a big deal? So perhaps it has something to do with the fact that the universe is made out of words. God spoke, and the world came into being. The power of speech is the power to create. With our words, we create our own realities. Speech has an amazing effect on the world around us. For example, compare two families. In the first family is a man who routinely speaks positive and encouraging words to his wife and children. In the second family is a man who routinely speaks negative and hurtful words to his wife and children. One family flourishes and the other languishes, all from the power of words. Do you ever feel as if your life is out of control? It could be a sign that your tongue is out of control. James, the brother of Yeshua, says we are like ships, and our tongues are like the rudders. We are like horses, and our tongues are like the bit and bridle. It is our tongues that steer our lives. And he says this, now if we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also, though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. James 3:3-5. So if we allow ourselves to speak out negative, the evil, and the cynical every time we encounter it, we will experience a negative, cynical, and evil world. If we compel ourselves to find the good in people, situations, and problems, and force ourselves to speak the good, declaring blessing instead of curses, we will see our world transformed. Everyone around us will also be transformed by that positive energy. With our tongues, we can build or destroy, we can mend or tear, we can fix or break. The tongue is the means by which we draw the holiness of heaven down to earth. We are able to build with blessings, but our tongues are also the means by which we can create a self-imposed hell on earth. Many believers use their tongues to damage the kingdom of heaven. We damage our communities, and we can damage our own souls. It is a big deal, far bigger than we may think. For example, suppose you're enjoying fellowship with a brother on Friday night Sabbath table when the name of another believer comes up in a conversation. You mention offhandedly that Mr. So-and-so is a bit quirky. Your friend takes this in and says, "You're right," he says. "So-and-so is quirky." No big deal, no harm done, but when your friend sees so-and-so the next day, your friend is a bit more standoffish. After all, Mr. So-and-so is quirky. Your friend begins to watch so-and-so's behavior for signs of quirkiness, and inevitably he sees them. Word of his quirkiness spreads. Others begin to note his irritating quirkiness. Very quickly, Mr. So-and-so finds himself less accepted in the fellowship. He decides to withdraw his family from the community. His children grow up without the support of believing peers. and in their teen years, they leave the faith. So in this example, generations are lost, all because someone felt it necessary to point out that Mr. So-and-so was quirky. Speech seeps into some consciousness. It colors the way we think and the way we look at things. At its core, evil speech against others is ruthless, merciless, voyeuristic, gawking, and jeering that takes delight in exposing weaknesses. It is petty and low, and Yeshua compares it to murder, actually. And he says that out of the evil stored up in one's heart, the mouth speaks. He says this, the good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. And that's in Luke 6:45. Now let's define the evil speech. The priest shall look and behold, if it appears to be lower than the skin, Leviticus 13:20. A skin affliction that appeared to be below the surface of the skin was one of the sure signs of biblical leprosy. Evil speech is also more than skin deep. Yeshua teaches that evil speech comes from the evil stored up in the man's heart. Evil speech is the opposite of love. Love covers a multitude of sin. 1 Peter 4:8, which is to say that love puts up with imperfections. A loving person intentionally looks the other way and ignores the weaknesses of others. Evil speech is just the opposite. The speaker of evil delights in pointing out character, flaws, and deficiencies in others. Rabbi Israel Meir Kagan, from 1838 through 1933, better known as the Chofetz Chaim, is famous in Judaism today for his classic book about proper speech. He defines Lashon Hara as follows. Lashon Hara, evil speech, is defined as information which is either derogatory or potentially harmful to another individual. A derogatory statement about someone is Lashon Hara, even if it will definitely not cause that person any harm. To focus on the shortcomings of another person is in itself wrong. A statement that could potentially bring harm to someone, be it financial, physical, psychological, or otherwise, is Lashon Hara, even if the information is not negative. Even true statements which are derogatory, harmful, are Lashon Hara. So let's break this down farther by defining derogatory information and potentially harmful information. So derogatory information. A derogatory statement is any negative comment or criticism. Speaking about a person's characteristics can be derogatory, such as mentioning that someone is stingy, reckless, or haughty. Relating an incident from someone's past can be derogatory. For example, mentioning that a person used to be short-tempered. Derogatory information should be considered evil speech, even if the information is common knowledge. Though it may be completely harmless information, it is still Lashon Hara. Now this is an example from our friend that a person in the Sabbath assembly he used to teach once made some uncommon remarks during an afternoon study session. After the Sabbath, he mentioned the incident to his wife. It was public knowledge. Nevertheless, by doing so, he lowered his wife's opinion of that person, and he spoke Lashon Hara. Now, what is potentially harmful information? That's any information that might be potentially harmful to a person, even if it is not in itself derogatory, is considered Lashon Hara. If the information would cause any embarrassment to the person, it should be regarded as harmful. If it could jeopardize the listener's feelings of goodwill toward the person, it is harmful. Suppose two mothers are discussing whether a certain movie is appropriate for viewing for children. One mother expresses her strong conviction that it's not. The other mother casually mentions that so-and-so family lets their children watch the movie. The statement was not derogatory or negative. It was simply statement of the fact. However, it could potentially damage a relationship. A careful analysis. So it says, if the bright spot remains in its place and does not spread, it is only the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Leviticus 13:23. The laws of biblical leprosy are complex, once again, and the priest had to check and recheck the symptoms on a man suspected of having leprosy before making a final diagnosis. In many cases, what first appeared to be biblical leprosy turned out to be some other condition. The same is true of evil speech. Sometimes negative remarks that appear to be lashon hara are actually not. There are sometimes valid reasons that justify speaking derogatory or potentially harmful information. In some instances, it is not only permissible to speak negatively, it is the ethical thing to do so. The following guidelines, loosely based on the works of Rabbi Israel Meir Kagan, will help a person to determine whether a particular piece of negative information is permissible to pass on or not. So the first, the rules of proper speech apply primarily within the fold of the people of God. Leviticus 19:16 says, "You shall not go about as a slanderer among your people." The term "your people" refers to the people of God. We should not refrain from identifying wickedness and evil for fear of speaking impolitically. For example, there is nothing wrong with identifying an anti-Semite as an anti-Semite, or a terrorist as a terrorist. Even within the people of God, it is permissible to speak negatively about a person for the following purposes. Number one, to help a person about whom one is speaking. When there is a sin and there might be the opportunity to bring correction, we should reprove one another. We should discuss with one another or with a trusted counselor how to bring reproof. Number two, to help someone who has been victimized or is in danger of being victimized. If one has personally witnessed a brother or sister causing damage to another, negative speech is permitted. When someone is suffering from some emotional, psychological, physical, or other injury, it is appropriate to discuss the people and the events involved in order to bring comfort, healing, resolution, and hopefully correction to the situation. This includes protecting people from falling victim to another person's behavior or deception in the future by warning them about the potential danger. And number three, to bring peace by resolving a major dispute. Argumentation is good, and differences in the Bible interpretation are healthy. Believers are welcome to hold a variety of opinions on spiritual matters. Sometimes a major dispute arises that threatens to divide a community. In those cases, there may be rare situations in which it is necessary for the leadership to speak out against those who are disrupting the peace. If we want to pursue truth, we must be free to point out errors, deceptions, delusions, and fabrications, and to expose wrong teaching and wrong ideas. Sometimes it is necessary for the sake of peace and truth to point out a lie, a hoax, or something that is demonstrably wrong. So if you are a part of the problem or a part of the solution, you may have a justifiable reason for speaking negatively, so long as you do so for a constructive purpose. If you are not part of the problem or part of the solution, the problem is really not your business. So before speaking negative information, a person should first consider the following criteria. The information must be first-hand information, not hearsay. The speaker must make certain the information is true and accurate. The intention of speaking the information must be only for a constructive purpose, and the potential undue harm must be measured. Finally, and most important, if we find ourselves deriving any personal satisfaction from speaking negatively of others, our motive is not purely constructive and we must stop. The personal satisfaction we feel in conveying the negative information proves that, despite our good intentions, we are speaking out of the evil of our hearts. Person might have the right reasons and still speak Lashon Hara simply because his heart is not right. Isolating the leper. So he shall remain unclean in days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Leviticus 13:46. The leper had to be isolated outside the community because the ritual unfitness caused by biblical leprosy was highly contagious. The same can be said of gossip and Lashon Hara. It is highly contagious and spreads rapidly through a community. Defiling everyone who hears it or speaks it, a person who is known who is a known gossiper should be avoided. People who refuse to control their tongues should be socially ostracized from a community of faith. The Proverbs say, "Do not associate with a gossip." That's Proverbs 20:19. So lepers were banned from the camp and from the city. As others approached a person diagnosed with biblical leprosy, he was to warn them off by shouting, "Unclean, unclean." The only thing is ritually contaminating, as a leper is a human corpse. So the Torah treats the leper like a man who has already died. The leper was expelled from the community. He was to rend his garments, cover his face, and cover his hair, and let it be unkempt, like a man mourning his own death. Following the idea that biblical leprosy was a punishment for gossip, Rashi explains that lepers were isolated as a punishment for estranging friends and families. He takes this explanation directly from the Talmud. It says this: "What is it that makes a leper so unique that the Torah says in Leviticus 13:46, he shall live alone, his dwelling shall be outside of the camp? His gossiping separated a husband from his wife and a man from his neighbor. Therefore, the Torah said, he shall live alone." And that's from B. Arachin 16b. So the gossiper breaks relationships. He is unkind. Words divide fellowship. Eventually, his habit of denigrating others leaves him isolated, alone, and without friends. Now we'll talk about healing for leprosy. This is the law for the mark of leprosy, Leviticus 13:59. The Torah does not offer a cure for leprosy. The leper had to simply wait and hope that the affliction would clear up and go away. Unfortunately, bad attitudes and poisonous spirits that lead to gossip generally do not clear up and go away by themselves. However, one of the signs of Yeshua's proclamation of the gospel was the healing and cleansing of lepers. Yeshua healed many lepers during the course of his ministry. He is also able to cleanse us from the horrible spiritual disease of evil speech and gossip. In him is the forgiveness of sins and the power to walk in a new life. Shouldn't we fall on our knees before him and say, along with the leper, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean"? Luke 5:12. But now you also put them all aside, anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive speech from your mouth, and let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Messiah also has forgiven you. Colossians 3:8 and Ephesians 4:31-32. And that's about it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, next time we will take up the continuation of this, so this will be labeled as part 2. So if this message blessed you, please like the video and subscribe. It helps the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram, linked in the comments for daily inspiration. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.